This is Lois Whealey with Women Today and Yesterday. And my guest today is Dottie. Dottie, I'm not sure I know how to spell and pronounce your last name.
My last name is Fromal.
Fromal, okay.
Dottie Fromal.
Dottie Fromal.
Yeah.
But I know you live in Nelsonville.
I do. I just moved there last year.
Oh, really?
So I'm a new resident of Nelsonville.
Right, so you're learning the ropes, so to speak.
I am.
Well, I know the Democratic Party county headquarters is there in Nelsonville.
It sure is. We opened up in May, and I've been volunteering there ever since. I volunteered we rented a space last year for the Hillary campaign, and this year we're down on the square. So we're really happy with our headquarters.
Yes, I've been there and I know it's very convenient. It's just a few steps off of the square itself, isn't it?
Yes. It's 39 West Columbus Street, right next to Paper Circle. It used to be an old deli.
Right, which is the, I'm not sure whether that's south, probably the south side of the square. It's off the south side of the square.
Yeah,
Columbus
I believe
Street.
so, right. It's a great location, and it's a beautiful old building. We have tin walls, a tin ceiling, and a star brick basement. It's really gorgeous.
Yeah, it's a classic building, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm told it was once the library in Nelsonville, which is fascinating to me.
Yes.
Before they built the new one.
Yes, they have a nice new library in Nelsonville. In fact, the county library is, all the branches are, look to Nelsonville because Nelsonville was the original county library.
Right. It is a beautiful library, and we have wonderful librarians there, so much programming. It's really good.
Yes. But like I say, that was started, I think, about 1920. It was when Nelsonville was really the biggest city in the county, considerably bigger than Athens in those days, and so on. And of course, the square itself has historic buildings like the Dew Hotel and, of course, Stewart's Opera House.
Right. It's a beautiful square. Then Stewart's just finished their renovation, and it's just beautiful.
They've enlarged their ground floor very large. I mean, they took over the next building, I believe, and knocked down the wall, and so now they have a really nice,
really
large
lovely lobby.
Yes. And they have so many good things there. In fact, I think they're opening pretty soon. They'll be opening a children's play.
Yes, Elf will be next weekend. Elf Jr. It's a children's play. ABC Players, I believe, is putting it on.
I see.
So it'll be exciting.
Well, I know my grandson Reese was thinking of being in that play. A number of other third graders like him, I think, are going to be there.
Are you going to go see it?
Oh yes, I hope to see it very much, although I believe he's going to be out of town now.
Oh no, that's too bad.
Right, maybe that just came up, but
I work at the Hive, which is also in the square. It's a children's drop-in program for an after-school program that Integrated Services funds, and we'll be taking the kids there next Sunday.
Oh, nice.
So we're really excited to take a bunch of children to go see Elf.
So it'll be a sort of a matinee.
Sunday afternoon at 2 o'clock.
Sunday afternoon at 2. It is starting, I guess, Friday.
Yeah, Friday, I think December 1st, and then Saturday and Sunday there'll be matinee shows. So.
Yes, it's they put on so many nice things there, and they bring in long distance groups. It isn't always just the local people.
That's true. They have a lot of good performances there.
Yes, but this will be nice because it will be very local with the local children performing in the play itself.
Yeah.
So that's December 1st, 2nd, and 3rd.
Yes.
And they have matinees on the 2nd and 3rd. Yeah. So folks, if you hear about this and hadn't heard before, why, pack up the kids and take them. And I'm afraid if we can't give you a phone reference, but I'm sure they do have, at Stewart's Opera House, they do have a, you know,
a box office where you can buy your tickets there, or you can click on their Facebook page and it'll send you a link to buy tickets online.
Right. The Facebook page for Stewart's Opera House will give you Elf.
Yes, Elf Junior.
Elf Junior.
Elf Junior.
Okay.
It's all children in the performance, I believe.
Oh yeah. Well, that will be fun. Also, sort of hair raising for them and their parents. My youngsters, who of course are in their 50s now, were active. David, whose son Reese is the one I mentioned, my grandson. David and Alice were both very active with community theater when they were younger. In fact, I remember David starting out playing Harmon Blennerhassett Jr., you know, Blennerhassett Island off of Parkersburg.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and named for the original people who lived there before Parkersburg itself was built, you know.
Where did he do that performance?
Well, it was during Ohio Valley Summer Theater.
Oh.
So I'm trying to remember whether it was at Cantner Hall or next door, but it was a good experience for him. He was in, I think he might have been in 7th grade at the time. It was, like I say, a long time ago. He was born in 1960, so
Okay.
he is soon, in just a week or two, going to celebrate his 57th birthday.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Wow.
They grow up faster than you think.
I'm sure they do.
Yeah. But it's, we have so many things here locally which help the children out. And I mean, they can go to the dairy barn for art lessons in the summer.
And Stewart's also offers music lessons, and they have a whole new education center they're building.
Do they?
So they'll be doing podcasting. And I don't work for Stewart's, so I don't know all the details. I just hear about it on the square.
Right.
But it's wonderful. And the Hive, I mean, we do a ton of programming, too. We do arts and crafts, and do a science Saturday, and we cook breakfast every Saturday morning for the kids. And
oh, nice.
It's wonderful.
Is it every afternoon after school? Or?
Every afternoon after school, and Saturday mornings from 10 to 1.
Right.
So.
And that's for the children from Nelsonville, York school district.
Yes.
So that does include, in addition to Nelsonville, Booktoll.
Right, and I don't know if there's a school district requirement. Just any child that is local to Nelsonville is welcome to come.
I see.
So even homeschool kids or kids that might go to school in Athens but live nearby.
So do you do that every day?
Well, I do work every day. I'm on site 4 days a week. So 2 days a week I work next door and just pop in and check on them every now and again. So it's a lot of fun. We have sometimes 15 kids, sometimes 25 kids, and they range from kindergarten to 6th grade is our primary group. And we have 7th graders through 12th grade. That is a part of the CIT program, and that's counselors in training, and that's a new program we just started a few weeks ago.
But that is something that helps the adult counselors in training to realize what it is like working with the children, right?
Right, and it gives them some extra responsibilities and some extra privileges as well.
Yes.
So it's working out well.
Sounds like a great program. But you mentioned that you only moved to Nelsonville about a year ago. Where were you before that?
Well, most recently I was in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I was there. Prior to that, I was living in Tanzania for a couple years. I worked at an orphanage in outside of Arusha in Karatu, which is just on the edge of the Serengeti, right, just 2 miles from the Ngorongoro crater, where the big volcano is. It's called the Rift Valley Children's Village. Is where I worked.
Oh, is it Central Africa?
East Africa, right?
East Africa,
right below Kenya. So
below Kenya.
just
yeah,
below Kenya, right?
So but it's not on the ocean. It's not on the Indian Ocean.
Yeah, the Indian Ocean is. I wasn't on the ocean side. I was closer to Lake Victoria.
I see.
So
yeah.
I was inland. It was about a 12-hour drive to the ocean for me. So
that's as far as it is to New York City.
exactly. But I did make it a few times. It's beautiful. And I went to Zanzibar, which is the big island off the coast of Tanzania.
Zanzibar.
It's a beautiful island.
How long were you there?
Altogether, a little less than 2 years. So I worked mostly at the Rift Valley Children's Village, which we called Rifty Valley. And they have about 100 children who live there full time, and about 170 children that they support. Some of those children are in college now, and they also support children living with families. So it's a wonderful organization, and I thought I would be there forever. So, and I hope I can go back someday.
Oh, that would be nice. After different experiences here in Southeast Ohio.
Right, right. And before Tanzania, I lived in New York City for about 13 years.
Oh, really? Well, I was born in New York City.
Oh, you were? I didn't know that.
But we left almost immediately. Let's put it this way: I couldn't walk when we left. I was about 9 months old.
Were you born in Manhattan?
In Manhattan, yes. My parents were living. Well, yeah, they were living just north of where today the United Nations building is.
Over on the east side,
River.
right?
Yeah, Sutton Place.
I know that building, yeah.
Do you? Well, you never thought you'd meet someone who was born there.
No, I never did.
But like I say, I was actually born in a hospital, but my parents were living there in Sutton Place at the time. And then they moved to Nevada when I was, like I say, 9 months old. And I was raised there in Nevada. But you mentioned Philadelphia. How long were you there?
Well, I was born in the suburbs of Philadelphia. We moved around quite a bit when I was a kid, but when I was 17, I went to Marietta College here in Ohio. I didn't really know about Marietta. I was at a college fair in Philadelphia, and they gave me a voucher for a free application. So I filled it out, and I was accepted, and then I took a scholarship exam, and I got a scholarship, so I came to Marietta.
Oh, yes.
So that was in the late 80s, early 90s. And when I left there, I did a Peace Corps program in Nepal for a little while.
In Nepal?
In Nepal, in Kathmandu, and then I spent 2 years living in China after that.
Wow.
And then a few years living in San Francisco, and then I moved to New York. and all these years later, I come back to Ohio.
Right. Back to roots of a sort.
Right.
I suppose Marietta College has reunions, class reunions, and so on.
Yeah, we just had our 25th, and I missed it because I think I was working at the Democratic Party office in Nelsonville.
It was a day when you were busy with something else. Well, class reunions can be fun, and they can be interesting to see how people have changed or not changed,
That's
as
true.
the case may be. I was an undergraduate at Stanford. I was a senior in high school in 1948, and then a freshman that fall. So, yeah, I must have gone back to, well, I'm pretty sure it was a 50th reunion or 60th reunion.
Oh, nice. It's a beautiful campus there. Wow.
Yes, it is, right.
Did you go there from Nevada?
Yes.
Oh, wow. What did you study?
History. What else? My husband and I are both historians, but he was a professional historian as a professor at Ohio University, but he's been retired now for, I guess he retired in 2001, so that's more than 15 years.
Oh, well, I know he still can speak like a professor. He came to the Democratic Party office in Nelsonville and
Yes.
gave a nice lecture.
Yes.
Answered a lot of questions.
Uh-huh.
Very entertaining.
Yeah, right. Well, he loves to talk, and he loves to tell people about history, and so that was a good event for him, for sure. And I'm trying to must have been about a year ago, or maybe
not that long ago. We just opened the office in May, so I think he came over the summer.
Right, yeah. Maybe
Oh,
in
it was
August.
right around Parade of the Hills.
Oh, okay, yeah.
So
that would have
in
been
August.
Late August, yes. Right, Parade of the Hills. It's all coming back.
Did you meet your husband at Stanford?
No, I met him at the University of Michigan in Ann Arbor. We were both graduate students there in 1954, and I met him at a square dance, which was an interesting thing. The previous year I had been teaching in Nevada, in northern Nevada, and one of the things that we did was learn to square dance there. So if I hadn't taught in Nevada and learned to square dance, I would never have met him in all likelihood.
Right.
It was one of those things where, you know, we were in the last dance of the evening going around and the music stops and there was Bob.
Wow.
So that was a rather romantic way to meet him.
Was he a good dancer?
Well, yes, he likes to dance very much. And my problem is that as old as I am now, well, both of us have motion problems. I'm afraid our square dancing days are over.
Did you teach your children to dance?
Yeah, and we had a couple of anniversaries, wedding anniversaries, where we had a square dance out at the Unitarian Universalist Fellowship here in Athens, which has a nice big room, you know, and very good for something like square dancing. Yes, that brought back the old days, but like I say.
What brought you and your husband to Ohio?
Well, he got a job here at Ohio University teaching history. So we came in 1964, and that's over 50 years ago now. So we have lived in Athens as, you know, home base anyway ever since 1964.
Did you also teach history here? Did you teach in the public schools? Or?
Well, actually I sort of retired when my first son was born, which was 59. I'd been teaching since 52. But I did teach a course at OU, well, twice, I guess. I taught a course. It was always a time when they needed somebody, you know, extra to help out. And in the earlier days, when there were fewer people with PhDs than there are now, I have 3 master's degrees, but not a PhD. And I did teach a course called Citizenship in the Modern World at Ohio University in the late 60s for a couple of years. And that was a fun course because we did some history, we studied the Constitution, we kept up with current events, and, you know, the type of thing that you might expect from a course in Citizenship in the Modern World, which was actually in the political science department. And I did finish my master's degree in political science after I had taught that course.
Oh, that's interesting. Did you do your master's degree at OU?
Yes. Well, my first master's degree was in education at the University of Michigan, which is where I met Bob, who was working on his MA in history there. And then later he was working on his PhD there in history. So, like I say, we were both interested in history.
Right.
One of the things I studied at Stanford, I did my senior seminars in Far East because, well, I had a general background in Europe and America, but the Far East was of particular interest to
Have
me.
you traveled to China or Japan?
No, I haven't,
Oh,
but
wow.
I was always very interested in China. In fact, I can remember when I was a student at Stanford, there was a professor there who came to, I don't know, it was a YW meeting or some meeting that I was, and he was talking about China, and what he said made me think, and this was like 1949 probably.
Oh, 1949.
Yeah,
wow,
long ago.
yeah. Well, I'm just thinking, isn't that when the communists came to power,
Yes,
1949,
right, the communists came to
the
power.
Long March, and yeah.
Yes, and I already knew a fair amount about China, and they were pretty far down on the, because they'd had a lot of problems. They had been, of course, they were invaded by the Japanese. The Japanese invaded Manchuria in 1931.
Right.
And they moved into China in 37. And they never occupied all of China because that's a very large place. But they had, like the communists themselves, had been on the Chinese coast. And they took a long march, 4,000 miles, back to the hills of northern China.
Right.
In the 1930s in order to escape the Japanese invasion. So it was, you know.
Well, that must have been a fascinating lecture.
Yes.
Have you heard of Agnes Smedley? She is an American journalist.
Yes.
And she was there during that long march. She met with Chairman Mao. I think she might have been the one who called him the paper tiger.
Oh, yes.
Was it Agnes Smedley, maybe? I'm not sure.
Yeah.
But I know she's buried in Beijing. She's
Yes.
very popular there.
Right.
Many of her books are
Yes, she
published
wanted
there.
to have her ashes returned to China because she had been there for a number of years in the 20s and 30s and 40s. Yeah, I don't think I've ever read a book by her, but I've certainly heard about her influence and her, you know, what she learned from China. And I'm sure that in the course that you had on China, there was some mention of her.
Yeah, well, I actually discovered her when I was living in China. There were very few English books, and her books were in shops, so I read them. I was fascinated by them. Yeah.
So you were there for 2 years. What were you doing?
Well, Marietta College at that time had an exchange. They would send graduates from Marietta and students or teachers from the Southwestern University of Finance and Economics in Chengdu, China, would come to Marietta College, and so we would send them back and forth.
Yes.
So I went 1 year, and I loved it so much I extended a second year. So I stayed a second year. So I was teaching English, conversational English, reading and writing at the Finance and Economics University in Chengdu.
In Chengdu.
Which is in Sichuan province, right in central central China. And I was so fortunate. I was a teacher, and so during my summer breaks, I was able to travel extensively throughout China.
Yes.
Bus and train, and it was inexpensive to do back then. So I saw, I think, every single province.
Oh,
yeah,
my
I was
goodness.
really quite lucky.
Yeah. And China's a very large place.
It sure is. Yeah.
It's larger than the U.S. or about the same size, I think, square miles wise.
Oh, I
maybe.
think it's bigger.
Yeah. And with a number of different provinces and quite different places, really. I mean, there's
Oh, yeah.
in the south, well, you mentioned Nepal, having been in Nepal.
It was one of the reasons that I've initially wanted to go to China. I wanted to see the Himalayan mountains from the other side. So I saw them from the south and from the north. So that was kind of a dream come true.
Were they that different?
Yeah, they were. And I
Quite
mean,
different.
Tibet is magical. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I remember in Europe, being in Europe and visiting Switzerland. As a child, I read Heidi over and over. And so when we went to Europe, and we were in southern Germany at the time, my husband was stationed there in the 50s. And he had a little VW bug. And so the first weekend he said, well, where will we go? I said, let's go to Switzerland.
That's great.
Yeah. But what I discovered later was, you know, northern Switzerland is very, lots of snow and stuff like that, and forest and what all. But one time we went as far as northern Italy, so we were in the South Alps, and it was very different. It was much like California.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Wow.
Mediterranean climate, you know, with sort of, well, grasses and so on, rather than forest, and just drier Mediterranean type climate. And not as, of course we were there during the summer anyway, so it wouldn't have been full of snow, but I was really struck at how much the south side of the Alps looked like the west side of the Sierra Nevada mountains.
Oh, that's really interesting. I have never spent any time in Europe. I've passed through the airports, but haven't spent any time there.
Well, they are, it's interesting. And my husband is a Spanish expert, in a sense. He did his dissertation on the Spanish Civil War, and actually right after the Spanish Civil War, when the Germans and Hitler had helped, the Nazis had helped Franco come to power. So the Germans arrived, you know, saying, okay, where's our money, kind of thing, because of all the aid they had given Franco during the Spanish Civil War. And so that's what my husband was writing on. So we've been to Spain a couple of times, and he spent better part of a year there. Actually 2 years. We were there 6 months at one point, and another time we went to England first, and he did research there in the Foreign Office records about the time, you know, during the late 1930s. But then he went to Spain and stayed in Madrid and did research there, and I stayed. We had young children at the time. They were in school in England, so I stayed there. We made one trip to Spain. In fact, I was thinking just the other day of it, maybe it was seeing the harvest moon or something. We were actually in Paris on our way to Spain right at Easter time. And, you know, Easter is this thing, it's the first Sunday after the first full moon, after the vernal equinox kind of thing, which is why it moves around so. But we were in Paris on a Good Friday, and right on the bridge near Notre Dame Cathedral, and the sun was setting in the west. We could see the sun setting in the west. The moon was rising in the east.
It must have been beautiful.
It was a wonderful thing to remember.
Did your children witness that too? Were they there with you?
Yes, they were with us. We went, like I say, we went down to Spain to visit their dad so they saw him for the first time in a couple of months, actually, because he had gone down at New Year's time, and we stayed in England. But it was a good time. We had a trip in the summer, where we went to Ireland and drove across Ireland.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that sounds
and
wonderful.
People commented that it was very dry. I don't think it rained once while we were in Ireland, and people couldn't believe it, you know. Kept expecting there would be rain every day. We were only there a week, but that week it didn't rain at all.
Good for you. Nice weather for you and your trip.
That was lucky, really. And
do your children remember that time they spent there? Or were they old enough?
Do. They were, let's see, our youngest was born in 63, and our oldest was born in 59, and our son, who lives here in Athens, our son David Whealey, was born in December of 1960. So they would have been old enough to kind of remember it.
That's really nice.
Yeah. And one of the things I never forgot about being in England with the kids was going to the south and taking a hike. They have special things where you go on a train, and then the group that goes on the train walks to some location.
Oh, I see.
And
did you take them to see Stonehenge?
Yes, yeah, they saw Stonehenge.
Wow.
Yeah. But in this particular thing, I was beginning to think, I'm wondering if my daughter's going to make it. She was about 6 or 7 at the time. And it was a long walk. It turned out to be 11 miles.
Oh, wow.
It was on the South Downs. We walked from the station to the coast, and it was 11 miles. Not huge mountains, you know, but rolling hills, and up this way and down the other side and up and down. And
that's quite a hike if you're not expecting it.
Yeah. Well, she made it. It was she was always looked very delicate, but really wasn't, you know, like some kids are. Yes, and so you've been in China for 2 years, and how long were you in Nepal?
Just under a year. I was there for a school year. So I did an internship with the Peace Corps through Marietta College.
For the Peace Corps.
It was a program they did back in the early 90s for 2 or 3 years with, I've forgotten the name of the organization. I've forgotten it.
But it's a group that does good works abroad?
Well, it was Peace Corps, United States Peace Corps.
Yeah.
So they were taking college students for just 2 or 3 years, and we would spend a year abroad working in their offices. So it was really interesting. I got to go to Kathmandu, and I trained with the medical doctor and the librarian. Well, we called it a resource center. And I did a cross-cultural survey of all the volunteers, and I was the guinea pig for the new language teachers. So they got me for 3 weeks, just me and maybe 7 language teachers. So I had Nepalese language lessons for about 8 hours a day for 3 weeks straight, and I feel like I learned more in those 3 weeks than I did in studying 8 years of German.
Oh, is that right?
Pretty intense. But without practicing it, most of it has been lost.
Although I hear it goes away. But,
sometimes.
But it would come back, you know, if you needed it. Although I must say that I thought that because I'd taken Spanish both in high school and college, that when I went to Spain it wouldn't be too difficult. However, it was many years later, or not that many, but pretty far, you know, maybe 20 years later, and I really hadn't done that much Spanish in the meantime. But you never can tell. I do remember that as far as language is concerned, my proudest moment was in a grocery store in Germany. And there was a German fellow there and a visiting French person. And they were trying to make some kind of contact. And I was able to help them.
Oh, good.
With what I remembered of my French and German, which wasn't that much.
Well, that's great. I had an interesting language day where one time I was, all of the languages I ever learned, and I don't think I'm fluent in any of them. I just know a little bit of several different languages. I was traveling from London to Nairobi, and at the airport I was exchanging money, and I had my wallet, which was from Nepal, and it had a picture as Wayambunath on the back of the wallet, and the clerk at the counter was Nepalese and gave me a greeting in Nepalese, and I was able to respond.
Oh, yes.
So I got to speak Nepalese, and then when I arrived in Nairobi, there were some German tourists who were having some difficulty reading the signs. So I got to use my German a little bit to help them find their way. And then I got on a bus to go to Tanzania, and I sat next to a woman who had just come back from China. So we were able to speak some Chinese and talk about some good food in China.
Wow.
And then I got to use my Swahili, of course, because I was in Tanzania. So it was a day of many languages, and it was fun.
Right.
So.
And you have to make a quick shift there.
Yeah. I mean, and I didn't have in-depth conversations about anything, but just some polite chit-chat. But it was good.
Well, and I do remember talking to an older friend who had gone to Germany but didn't really know any German. And so we were, just chatting, and he said, well, I couldn't figure out why every station was called Ausgang, which means exit. So, of course, every station had a big sign that said Ausgang on it.
Did you spend any time in Germany?
Yes. My husband was there for a year. He was in Stuttgart.
Okay.
He was drafted at the very end of the Korean War. So he went to the Army in January of 1955, which was just about the time that, they had signed a sort of a truce or something in 54. And so it was really, there wasn't any war on. He was in the peacetime army. But they said, hey, we let you go a couple of times during the actual fighting, because he'd been going to college, in the earlier 50s. And I said, we got you now.
So you were able to go with him, or?
Well, yes and no. Let's put it this way. I went to Fort Knox, which is where he had his basic training. And I got a job there in the library, and we didn't know how long he would be there. So I'd been working, I had just finished my master's in education at Michigan. So I applied for a teaching job there. And so it turned out that he was sent to Germany in August, I believe, or September. But I had this job lined up, and of course, since he was just a private, there was no way that I could really accompany him. I needed a job. So I taught at Fort Knox. I taught 7th grade there, which was kind of fun and different, because they had more kids than they thought they were going to have.
How many kids were in your classroom?
Well, it was not a large group, but they had about 43 or something 7th graders. So they hired 2 teachers. And so I had about 22, and she had about 22. But they had to put us in a big, huge, long squad room. One of the, Army barracks type things. And I was at one end, she was at the other end.
Oh, could you hear each other?
Yes, it was
wow,
terrible.
It must have been really loud. Did you teach all subjects or just history?
No, I taught all subjects.
Okay.
7th grade was. And so they were, 13-year-olds mostly, and so on. And it was interesting, the school board came around for Fort Knox sometime during the year, and in the fall, actually. And we'd been putting up with this problem of two classes at either end of this big, long, echoing room. And the school board asked about that, and the other teacher, who was she'd been teaching for a longer time, and she said, well, you want to know, I'm quitting at New Year's. She said, I can't put up with this.
Oh, wow.
Well, you know what happened? The next day, some guys came from the Army and measured things and so forth, and they constructed a wall.
So they put a wall between the rooms?
On the floor. I mean, they built a wall, like with a door in a window, you know, on the floor, and then they put it up and attached it to the plumbing on either side, you know. So then we did have two real rooms. In that,
and blocked out on the sound and everything,
yes,
right? So
much
she
better.
didn't quit.
So, well, as a matter of fact, she did quit.
That wasn't enough, huh?
Right, but we got another very nice woman who was a teacher who had been retired for a while, and she actually had her son in that class, as it turned out. But yeah, it was something, and we did square dancing with the kids, and they had a good time, seventh graders, and for the most part.
Did you teach there for 1 year, or for?
Yes, just 1 year, and then at the end of the year, I'd saved money up, of course, and my husband had been in Germany all that year, for 9 months anyway, and so in June, as soon as school was out, I took a boat from Montreal that went to England,
Oh, by
where
ship?
I first.
Wow.
And I got off, and I remember thinking, oh, it's so cold, you know. It was cold and rainy and so forth, and I couldn't get the window down in my hotel room. There was this cool, damp air coming in the whole time, and I thought, gee, it's this bad in June. What will it be like in December? Well, it was hardly any difference.
Right.
Because they're close enough to the Gulf Stream that they don't have really, usually they don't have severe winters. Sometimes it just falls a little bit below freezing. So that was a welcome surprise to find out that December wasn't much worse than June.
Right. How was the journey by boat across the ocean?
Oh, it was fun.
How long did it take?
About a week. It was basically, well, like I say, leaving from Montreal. By the time you get out of the Gulf of St. Lawrence, you're almost there. I mean, you're almost to Greenland, you see, because it's so large. The Gulf of St. Lawrence is a really big body of water. And so it was about a week. And it's it's kind of intense. I mean, there you are, you know, there are only a dozen other, at least on this vessel, basically just had a couple of, it wasn't a huge passenger ship. It was basically a freighter, but they had space for some people.
Some passengers.
Passengers.
Oh, interesting.
And we had very nice, you know, nice dinners and all sorts of good things. And so it was, and that's the only time I was ever long range.
Did you travel back by boat, or did you fly
No,
home?
we flew. We flew back about a year later, because Bob went to Oxford.
Oh, I see.
After he was released from the Army, he went to Oxford, and it was a very exciting time, because the Hungarian Revolution occurred, and the Suez Crisis That was in the fall of '57. Both those things happened right about the time he was released from the Army in the fall of '57.
So when he was released, he stayed in England or in...
We were there mostly in Oxford.
Okay.
Because he was attending classes there. He had written to a specialist at Oxford in the Spanish Civil War.
Mm-hmm.
And she had accepted him as a recognized student, meaning he wasn't working for a degree, but he was able to attend classes.
Oh, okay.
But the problem was that when we arrived, unfortunately, she had a serious illness that kept her, you know, I don't think we ever met her, actually.
Oh, well, that's too bad.
She was in a rest home sort of situation.
Mm-hmm.
At the time, but there were, of course, plenty of professors around, and Bob had a very interesting time. Met famous Oxford dons and all that sort of thing. So we had a very good year at Oxford, and I had a job because I had stopped on the way over, and it would not be possible for me to teach in an English school, but someone said, well, check the Air Force. They might, the American Air Force,
right.
They might have something, and they did. I had, you know, the good background, certain amount of practical teaching and a master's in education and so on. And so they hired me to work with American GIs who didn't have, most of them had not finished high school.
Oh, I
and that
see.
was unusual in those days. And they nowadays, I think you have to finish high school in order to join up.
So were you helping them finish like a GED
or
diploma?
a GED, yeah, yeah. So those were the men that I was working with, and it varied. Some of them, if they had really been pressed into having to do it, they were grouchy and you know, didn't really want to learn anything anyway. But there was one class that I had that was very good, where they sort of began to compete a little bit with each other, you know.
Oh.
And that helped.
Yeah, it does. A little
They
bit
were
of a
putting their
competition.
noses to the grindstone. And that was a really good class. But, you know, it varies. But I did do that all that year, and I was able to drive to the west and to the north, because there were American servicemen at a number of bases nearby.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah,
So did,
this was
did
in
the Air Force
56.
offer like a GED diploma, or was there a national
Well,
exam? Or?
it wasn't. I wasn't offering a GED, but I was helping them. I think they were looking to have to take new tests,
I see.
and in order to stay in the service. And of course, most of them wanted to stay in the service. So if they were serious, then they would work, and it would help. Now, I never was. I think I finished up before they actually had the test, so I'm not sure how many of them actually passed.
I'm sure most of them did.
I hope that most of them passed.
Did your husband retire from the military at that point?
Yes, he had finished 21 months. And then he had this letter from the lady professor at Oxford saying that he could go to Oxford. So they let him, in those days, you would have to serve 2 years, 24 months. But if you were going back to school, they would let you leave after 21 months, and that's what happened. He had started in January of '55, and so this was like October of '56 that he finished his year in Germany and went to England. And it turned out to be professionally very good for him
Mm-hmm.
because he had that year in Germany,
Mm-hmm.
and he was always a big hitchhiker. So he hitchhiked in Germany.
Yeah, he told us some stories about hitchhiking when he was at the Democratic
Yes.
Party office.
Right. Well, he hitchhiked all over the U.S., but he
Mhm.
also hitchhiked a lot in Europe. The year that I wasn't there, you know,
Mhm.
so I was teaching at Fort Knox, and he was in Germany, and every week I'd get a long, long letter from him.
About his
which was-
hitchhiking adventures.
Yeah, well, it was. And as it turned out, I mean, peacetime army. And there wasn't anything really going on in terms of war or threats of war or what all until the very end. Like I say, the Suez Crisis occurred in October, late October, early November of '57. And that was, you probably haven't heard of it, it's a long time ago. The English and the French and the Israelis tried to occupy the Suez Canal.
Mm-hmm.
And the Egyptians sank boats, vessels, all in the canal, so the canal was blocked. The United Nations objected to this move by England, France, and Israel. And so actually both the Soviet Union and the U.S. protested that move where they had tried to take over the canal.
Mm-hmm.
And so it was a scary couple of weeks. And in fact, at the time, it was before Bob came from Germany, I was in England already, and I remember I was in Oxford at a bed and breakfast place, and we were having breakfast one day in September of '57, and someone said, "Why are there troop trains going through town?" Troop trains? Everybody's looked at each other. Troop trains? They couldn't imagine why there were troop trains going through town in Oxford in September. But, you know, in late October, I could see what was, they were preparing.
Right.
They'd been preparing to invade the Suez Canal the next month, which they did. And then, like I say, they had to stop because A, the Egyptians stopped them, and B, the United Nations stopped them, and with the U.S. and the Soviet Union both objecting, they had to stop. So it was an interesting historical time.
It's been fascinating to be there
Yeah,
during that time
yeah.
and witness it all firsthand.
Right. We weren't down there at the scene, but it was a lot of news.
Mm-hmm.
And no one knew where it was going to go either. You know, you didn't know where it was going to head. But it had all been developing during the year '57 because the British and French were going to help the Egyptians build a high dam on the Nile. And they decided not to do that. And they were in charge of the Suez Canal. They had been in charge of the Suez Canal for 100 years,
Mm-hmm.
Really. And so that was the match that set it off, was the French and the British not following through on this aid to the Egyptians. And then, you know, it was a pretty exciting year, '57.
And did you return to the United States after that?
Yes. After the year at Oxford, Bob stayed there a year, and we had a very good view of England. But because of the blockage of the Suez Canal, in those days they didn't have the long pipelines
Mm-hmm.
from the Middle East to the shores of the Mediterranean. And the vessels that carried the oil from the Middle East were going through the Suez Canal and the Mediterranean to get to Germany and France and England, so on, you know.
Mm-hmm.
So that was the whole point of blocking the Suez Canal, was they had to go all the way around Africa.
Right.
And so there was gas rationing in England. And luckily, because I was helping the American Army, I got enough gas to do my work, and we got enough extra that we were still able to do a little travel, in spite of the fact that
There was some rationing going on.
rationing was going on in England for a year following the Suez Crisis. So, well, we've talked on and on about a lot of different
We
things.
sure have.
And it's just about the end. So give us some good words.
Let me think. I love living in Nelsonville. I met so many interesting people there, and it's been very welcoming. And I see so much happening, so much potential in that little town. In the headquarters for the Athens County Democratic Party, we've had a woman declare for city council, and she won her race. And
nice.
we had Rick Jarvis, who's a teacher at Tri-County, declare that he's running for Congress against Stivers in District 15. And then Taylor Sappington, who's also on city council in Nelsonville, is running for state rep against John Edwards, and all of that's happening in Nelsonville. So
Right.
it's been an exciting year.
They're keeping you busy.
Yeah, lots of volunteer work there.
That's really nice.
Yeah, and we'd love to have you come visit us again.
Okay, well, we'll have to stop by one of these times. Probably not when we were on our way to Elf, but
Yeah, might not be the best day.
so it's been very nice, Dottie, to have you on.
Thank you for having me.
And this is Lois Whealey for Women Today and Yesterday, thanking my guest, Dottie Fromal, for being with us today.